Welcome everybody to this episode of the YOUtopia video podcast. I'm really excited today to talk to the lady that I'm going to talk to because we only very recently met, and the reason I reached out to her is because I was completely aligned with what she shared and the message that she shared, and I kind of feel like even though we've only literally, this is our second ever conversation, we have a lot in common. And I really am all about championing people that inspire me. And Jojo is definitely somebody in the short time that I've known her has really inspired me. She is a wellness advocate. She's a blogger. She's a speaker. She is big into mental health, and she's a big advocate for mental health, which is something which is really important to me. And this being Mental Health Awareness Month, I think is absolutely critical that more than anything, what we do is highlight to people that it's not about, it's just okay to not be okay. It's okay for you to reach out. It's okay for you to share. It's okay for you to share your story and do that with confidence, because you are going to get the support that you need. And one of the reasons why I do these interviews and I talk to people is because I've had my own journey with mental health, and I am the first to admit there have been occasions when I've wanted to check out. But, you know, I had amazing support around me. I had people that helped me, that guided me. And I like to believe that I am a living example that everything is possible. And so is this amazing lady. So without further ado, Jojo Fraser, welcome to the YOUtopia video podcast.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for those lovely words. And yeah, it's so important to be able to have these real, where we can take the masks off and just share who we are and show up fully. And I love kind of connecting and having these real conversations. I think they're such an important part of, you know, our wellness. So thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you. And it's, I'm going to kind of go straight off with that. It is an important part of our wellness, because for me, it's the whole package, you know, it's the holistic package. And I know it's the same for you, because what we put inside us, the way that we are inside, the way that we feel about things, what we feed ourselves, the whole package is what counts, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the full shebang. And that can take a little bit of work, and it's a bit of discovery as well, and questioning why we do the things we do, why we eat the things we eat that we perhaps don't want to, or why we have that extra bottle of wine that we don't really want to, but what's the trigger for that? Why we perhaps don't share openly, these kind of deep-rooted fears that we have of being judged. And yeah, it's complicated, but I like to try and break things down and just, keep it real. And I think staying curious as well, having that open-mindedness and being willing to explore, and not just putting all that focus on, oh, I'm working. I hear a lot of people, oh, I'm working with a great personal trainer, and putting a lot of focus on their physical health, which of course is important.
Yeah.
Great to look after our bodies, but I just think we need more spotlight on the things that we can't see, because I've interviewed a lot of people over the years who may have a six-pack and be looking amazing, and flawless hair or flawless children or the perfect relationship. And whether that be on social media or just meeting someone for a brief period, and you think, oh, wow. And then we start to make up these stories. We start to become intimidated. We start to compare. But actually, I've spoken to so many people who look like they have it perfect, who are actually struggling even more. And it's almost like a mask that if everything looks perfect on the surface, then it won't be, these problems will perhaps go away, or, do you know? And it's like,
I can completely relate to that, because part of my journey was when I had my breakthrough when I was 29. I was actually working in, I was self-employed at the time, but I was working as a consultant within an office, and none of my colleagues knew, Joe, what was going on.
Yeah. So common.
Yeah, and that is, you know, there you go, there's a perfect example of it. And it wasn't until a few years later when I really told them about the severity of what had happened to me that they then said, wow, we had absolutely no idea. We knew that there was something not right because you were very, you know, you were very angry and you had a very short temper at the time, but we didn't realize the depths of what you talked about. And as you say, you know, it's been, it kind of really floors me with the media that, you know, they, like the recent one with Will Smith, you know, the guy has been completely vilified for what he did. And it's like, gosh, look at his background. He watched his dad beat his mom. He very clearly hasn't dealt with that fully. There's very clearly splinters in there and emotional traumas and emotional triggers that need to be healed. And what have you done? You've stripped him of his Oscar. You've completely vilified him. And that's what we're here to change, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a worrying thing. Society and the stigma that, although we've come a long way, I've been researching mental health for 7-8 years now. And although I've noticed a huge shift, I felt like I was one of the only ones speaking about it when I started campaigning. I feel like lots of people are talking. But when I dig deeper and I go to talks or I meet people, I'm like, yeah, there's still so much work to be done. You know, there was a chat I was in the other day, and it was saying someone in the wellness industry was advised not to speak about their past mental health trauma because it would sort of perhaps they'd lose their credibility. And I'm going, well, actually, no, because when we go through things as hard as they can be, there's nothing like experience. You can have all the theory in the world, but life does still go on. We do have moments where we flourish. We have moments where we struggle. And that's called being a human being with a mind, with a life, with other things out with our control, right? And yeah, I just find it's really frustrating. We've still got a lot of work to do. And even looking at, there was a documentary last night, I don't know if you saw, but Will Young and his brother Rupert.
No, I didn't see that. I heard about it, but I didn't actually. I was dog training last night, so I'm going to catch up on it.
After on Channel 4, just so powerful. And about, you know, they were talking about, you know, was leading psychologists, psychotherapists saying that this system is flawed in so many ways. And support for someone, say, with alcoholism or drug addiction, it's almost like, oh, you're the lowest of the low because, you know, you don't deserve to get help if it's something like that, when actually addiction is a form of mental illness. It's, you know, it can perhaps starts from depression or trauma or whatever, but it's part of the illness, right? It's addiction is a mental health. So just hearing that these things still go on, and that people are still judged, and it's frustrating because it'll make people say you're an alcoholic want to hide it all the more, because you're thinking, I don't want people to see that. So perhaps compensating in other ways for addictions, or, you know, and the big addiction these days is nomophobia, you know, screen usage, the twitching fingers, the, you know, can you sit and watch a film and not be worrying about one of the myriad of things you can check on your phone, because the phones have everything, right? They're so useful in ways, but we're so wired. These developers are crazy clever, and they know it's like a slot machine, right? And I find myself, I have good days and bad days, but some days I'm like, oh, I've not checked in a while. Oh, I can feel my hands just from habit. What do I want to go on? Do I want to go on WhatsApp? Do I want to go on Facebook? Do I want to, you know, check my bank details? Do I want to check emails? Do I want to play Sonic the Hedgehog like I've got an old school game?
Yeah.
And I could even think of, oh, it'd be quite nice to like jump on those boxes and get those hoops, because it takes me back to play in my childhood. So it's just the programming and the neural pathways that are created around our hands and pleasure. And it's, we just need to talk about these things.
There's a few things that I want to pick up from what you said there. And the first thing, and I just love it because it just shows, I love the way that the universe beautifully brings us together, because I always say that experience is the mother of all lessons. And when you've walked in my shoes, quite frankly, then you get an opinion on it. Until then, I'm really not interested in what you've read about it, because if you haven't lived what I've lived, then you really don't know what it's like, and you don't get the impact of what it's like. And also it's the way that some people speak to you. You know, I've really dealt with the fact that I was made bankrupt. I've dealt with it all, and I'm honestly, I'm going through a huge complaint about the company that dealt with my bankruptcy at the moment, because I believe that they've been very negligent. And I complained to them, and they wrote back to me. And, you know, I'm not a label, I'm Clare. And in this document, in their response to my complaint, they call me the former bankrupt, must be 20 times.
Oh.
And it's like, my name's Clare. So yeah, I totally agree. And again, that's a beautiful example, literally a week ago, of exactly everything that you're talking about. But following on from addiction, and this might be something that you have come across or haven't, but there's a really interesting guy called Gabor Mate, I think it's how you pronounce it. And he talks about generational patterns with addiction. And he talks particularly about, in the one episode that I listened to, he talked about Chicago, and he talked about the generational issues and the fact that a lot of children were removed from their families and put there. And so addiction was actually a byproduct of what they'd experienced. And then because it was a generational pattern, it actually just continued, because, you know, like we know, if there's a generational pattern there, until somebody breaks it and changes it, it will always continue. You know, my mum really in many ways was a manic depressive. I didn't really see that when I was a kid. It scared me because, you know, she used to have these absolutely huge meltdowns. She used to lock herself in a cupboard, sob her heart out and cry. And, you know, as a little girl, I thought that it was all my fault, and I thought that it was all about me. And actually, in reality, what it was about her horrific childhood. She had a horrific childhood. She was never felt loved as a kid. She never felt accepted. From the age of like 7, she was expected to stay home from school and mother her siblings, because her mom was always, you know, my grandma was always pregnant. She had 8 children. My grandfather had got severe PTSD, as it's labelled, from the war. And so my mum carried all of this stuff. You know, she went her entire life, Joe, without us really knowing. When my mum was 60, we got her help and support around her reading and writing. She had the reading and writing ability of a 7-year-old.
Wow.
She ran a multi-million-pound corporation with my dad.
Wow.
And nobody knew. Because she got all these amazing techniques of how to do it without us actually knowing what she was doing. And so what the really interesting thing was that basically, you know, she managed it all, but she didn't manage it all because then she died with what really was an emotional illness, because she'd never dealt with the trauma. So I think that everything that you say is absolutely key. And the more that we can have these really raw, real conversations about things, the more that we can do to change it. And you know, and I am absolutely standing next to you, supporting you and saying, look, you know, whatever I can do, that we can work together on this. I want to do that because, like you know, I've championed this for a really long time. I've been dealing with a lot of mental health issues in my own life for probably 16, 17 years now. And I'm making massive progress. I'm making big steps. And I think that it's so important for us to be out there and do exactly as you say, and say, right, how can I help? How can I support you? So tell us a little bit more about how you got into this. What was it tell us a bit about your story.
Yeah, it's quite, you know, when I get asked that, I sort of think there could be so many reasons. It could be the sort of perfect storm of how I got into it. I think I've always been obsessed with self-development. And I remember I would be reading self-development books kind of in my teenage years even. And, you know, I remember a friend saying, why are you always reading those books? Almost like it was a kind of, oh, what's wrong with you? Why do you need that? And it wasn't, I was always quite happy. I mean, obviously we have happy days, we have sad days, we have anxious days, but I was always quite a happy kid, teenager, you know, of course there would be traumas, be stuff that happened in childhood. I can't pinpoint one thing, but there's memories, flashbacks of tough days, maybe having the belt, or a teacher whacking me, or a bully, or running away from a bully and almost getting hit on my bike, you know, stuff, boys, all that stuff. Still felt the emotions. It was quite a big feeler, quite a big thinker, but was always had this kind of happy and carefree side too, to the point that people thought I was weird because I would walk around just singing when I was sober, just sort of free spirit. And I think in the UK and in Scotland, if you're too free spirit, you are seen as a bit of a weirdo. But sometimes it was like a jokey way. It was like, oh, check her out. Like one of my friends from uni joked recently, and I don't remember this, but he said the first time he saw me, I was walking around just singing in the daylight, stone cold sober. And he was like, better stay back from that nutter. And we became really, really good friends. But I loved how honest he was. He was like, that was my first impression of you. I just thought you were too intense, bit much, bit of a weirdo. But actually, as he got to know me, he knew that I had a very down to earth, grounded side. But we kind of pigeonhole people, don't we? And first impressions, it could just be you get someone on a really good day, or you get someone. But yeah, I always had this kind of free spirit side, which is very much still in there. But I realized, I think it was when I was traveling, I'd burnt out from partying a little bit. So I thought I was invincible, was 24 at the time, and had my first panic attack. And that was just from too much alcohol, too many late nights. You know, the culture there was very much meet after work. We worked in the kind of wild adventure sports. I was on jet boats. Life looked amazing, but I'd been there working for like 4 months, having backpacked before that. So all that partying is going to catch up with you, right? And I just started to feel like my mind was in overdrive. And one day on the pier, when I was taking photos of people that had come off the boat, I just started to feel really overwhelmed, and the noises were really loud, and it was saying like, who are you? What are you about? And I started to be like, who am I? Who am I? I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am. Oh, this thought scaring me. Am I losing my mind? Am I losing my mind? And I had to go and sit downstairs in this aquarium and just sit and go, take a few breaths. And I got back that night, and one of the backpackers in the house I was staying in said, I think you've just burnt your mind out with all the partying. I think you just need to rest. So I traveled I traveled for a bit on the way home, got back after a year traveling, and thought, right, I need to get healthy. Joined the gym, you know, got in shape, got a job I loved. But again, I was still drinking on weekends, partying, late nights. And I found that sometimes if I had too much coffee, I would start to experience this anxiety. And I was like, what's going on with me? Because I'd be total performance, like going to these boutique hotels, meeting clients, having the coffees and thinking, oh, I'm panicking because something's going on in my head, just not realizing the power back then. This is going back to 2007, 2008. Early 2008. So I'm just not realizing the power of maybe in these fancy 5-star hotels, maybe a 3-shot coffee. So I'm going, what's happening with my brain? And then it's like health anxiety, you're overthinking that. And my mum was just saying to me, how many shots are in all those coffees you're having? And I realized sort of the lifestyle. So once I could sort of figure that out, and my mum used to always say, don't stop worrying about yourself so much. Like, she's quite a direct person. She's quite a wee, we call it a Raj in Scotland. She's quite a feisty wee thing.
Yeah.
My mum will just tell you how it is, like, get over yourself, you know. And it's not good for you to think about yourself too much in your own head. Like, you need other things going on. And that sort of stuck with me, because my dad had experienced anxiety and bouts of depression. I mean, he'd had a tough life. He lost his eyesight when he was 19. He had his journey. So my mum had seen him go through bouts of kind of depression, anxiety. So she could see that when we are mentally not great, we can become quite self-absorbed. We start to overthink things too much. So she encouraged me to actually just get a bit of perspective.
Yep.
A step back from it. So I started to do that and started to find some tools. But I think the biggest trigger was a few years later when I had my first baby, 2012. And it was actually 2013, we started to see signs that my dad became very withdrawn and went into a period of deep depression. He did try and talk about it, but he was very much, stigma was there. You could tell he was like, really don't want to, but he did try and talk about it. And my husband was so good with them. He sat, because my mother-in-law's a manic depressive. So he sat with them, had a chat, helped a bit. So my dad was trying to talk, but then they gave him this medication, and the medication said may cause suicidal thoughts, and they sent him home with no support. So he became very unwell. It wasn't safe for him, so we had to get him put into the psychiatric ward. So he was in there for a few months, and during that time I started campaigning. Because at first I took it personally. I think that was my first big mental health experience with a loved one. And when he went from being like my best friend in the world to nothing to do with his family, go away, pushing us all away, it was heartbreaking, because I didn't understand at first. It was like, what have I done? Take it personally. So seeing him get so unwell, I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much stigma and need to talk about this. So I started writing about it on the blog, and I wrote this piece called Please Stay and Hold My Hand. And it's about, sometimes we can't, as carers, we want to try and fix someone, but they have to kind of want to get the help. But sometimes all we can do is just sit and hold their hand and not judge them, and remember the person they really, really are. And you could apply this to someone, say, with Alzheimer's, with dementia, you can only meet them where they're at. And sometimes we just need to forget about ourselves and being the victim. What have I done? And actually just realize that we can't control everything, but we need a lot more compassion with mental well-being. So that sort of started my 7-year journey of researching, campaigning, running marathons to raise money for the Mental Health Foundation, writing my book, writing and launching a podcast, working with amazing brands, speaking in companies, speaking at events. And it's just been an amazing 7 years of self-discovery as well. And I've absolutely loved it. I did have a blip in 2020, January 2020. I suffered severe burnout. It wasn't just burnout though. I'm very inquisitive. So thankfully I was only really, really unwell for 2 months. I had to go into hospital for 33 nights. Wow. And what they said, they believe I had a one-off intense manic episode, which was triggered by stress and insomnia. But actually, over the past 2 years, as I've healed, I've really unpicked that. I wrote a script, a film all about it, which was triggering. So it took me 2 years to write, all about where I think it came from, what was the perfect storm, and really exploring key themes. But there was a real overlap between psychology and spirituality. So for me, it's not just speaking to a psychotherapist, it's speaking to a spiritual care team, because the line's blurred. There's things that happened that were deeply spiritual, but then depending on your school of thought, some may say, no, it was just a hallucination because you were manic. So I had all the signs of mania, but I also had a lot of signs of spiritual kind of awakening. Sort of, I was doing so much mindfulness, so you could call it ego death. I became so aware of my thoughts and started to distance and come out of my head and do all this amazing mindfulness work and meditation and spiritual practice and prayer. I've never had such deep spiritual experiences in my life. So my research it's very much lots of mental health, but spiritual health as well, because of those experiences.
Yeah, and the spiritual realm is very much where I come from with all of it, because as you say, there is a psychological reason. There is a justifiable reason in many ways for everything that we experience. But, what I always say is, if your body is in dis-ease, it is trying to tell you something, or maybe multiple things. If your body goes into that place where it shuts down, and I get that whole shutdown, because my version of it was my husband, well, boyfriend at the time, now husband, came home and found me naked, rocking backwards and forwards on the bathroom floor. and, you know, and I'd just gone, I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to do. I was completely depleted of anything. And, you know, and because I am a big delver into there's a reason why this has happened, you know, I really started digging into that. And as you say, you know, it's that whole package, because the fact of the matter is, quantum physics is a real thing. Quantum is a real thing. Everything is energy. So when you start bringing together the psychology theories, and when you start bringing together the spiritual theories, it just gives you such a clearer picture of everything, doesn't it?
Yes, but I still find it hard, because I know there was spiritual things that happened,
Yeah.
but also I'm a bit messed up because I grew up in a Christian home. So when I pray, I've always, you know, seen Jesus, but then you start to think about labels and stuff. So you're like, oh, right. Should I be visualizing a white man with a beard when I pray, right? So you've got all this, and then you know, I got a bit older and I was like, right, I accept so much of the Bible about love and stuff, but I cannot accept that people will burn in hell. And I also cannot accept that people who believe they found God and use a different label, I cannot say to them, no, this is the only way. That doesn't sit right with me either. And then someone will say, well, how can you have faith if you're saying that there's other ways? And I'm saying, I'm not saying I do not know, but what I know is my faith's important to me. But I also know that labels can mess people up. I know that, it's hard, because I was also getting involved in energy stuff. I did an energy course, and there'll be people from a Christian background that would say, well, that's fine, you know, God is love, it's all, but then you'll get some saying, oh, careful, because with Reiki, evil spirits can get in. So I'm going, and then you'll hear, oh, the devil comes for you when your faith's vibrating really strong. And I'm going, is the devil coming for me now? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's a journey of unpicking all that stuff.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is, because it's so ingrained, isn't it? Like you say.
Yeah.
And maybe, have you ever come across the work of Neil Donald Walsh?
I don't think so.
So this might actually help you with that. And again, I'm such a huge believer, and we have these conversations for a reason. Neil wrote a book called Conversations with God. In fact, he wrote 3 books called Conversations with God, and he's then written many other books. And Neil wrote the book because Neil believes he had a conversation with God. Mm-hmm. In fact, if you go into the finer detail of it, he says the only thing he had available at the time was like the yellow legal writing paper. Mm-hmm. And he wrote all the books, channeled the conversation with God. And actually what he talks about in there is the modern misinterpretation of the Bible. And there's a really beautiful version of the Lord's Prayer, because, you know, I my religion is spirituality. I respect people that are Christian. I respect people that are Hindu, that are Jewish, that are Catholic. Whatever your religion is, for me, it's another name for the same thing. I call it oneness in the universe. You call it God. Does that mean that I don't believe in God? No, it just means that I don't call it that particular thing. And, you know, one of my business partners and one of my closest friends talks about God because she believes it's God. And yesterday we were having a conversation where she said, you are a child of God as I am a child of God. And I'm just like, okay. And actually the interesting thing is that was something I really had to overcome, because I was brought up by an atheist and an agnostic. Okay. And I went to Sunday school every week because I lived in a tiny little village, and that was what all the kids in the village did. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with this really, really confused, very confused view. And the interesting thing was, when I started digging into my gene keys, into like my whole purpose of being here, what's in my gene keys, that I used to have a major issue with people talking about God. I was like, no, it's not God. And I got really, because I'd been so ingrained into that. And as you say, you know, it's that journey, isn't it? It's that unpicking of it all. But it's, you know, I get you, because I've had huge spiritual experiences. I mean, not long after my mum had passed away, a friend of mine who did know my mum really well. She came to have dinner with me, and long story short, she came in and my mum came with her, and me and my mum had a conversation for 3.5 hours. And I, on my daughter's life, know that it was my mum, because I asked her questions that my friend didn't know.
Wow.
And she didn't know because when my mum was ill, it was such an intense period. My little girl was really young. You know, for a very long story, we had no support for the first 6 weeks of her illness. She then only lasted another 4 weeks. And so, you know, it was really challenging. And basically between me, my dad and my sister and my aunt, we nursed my mum. And so I'd had very little time to really talk to anybody and tell anybody what had gone on. And this particular night, my friend was coming for me to just have a conversation about what had gone on. And she wanted to hear because she knew my mum really well. And you know, we had this conversation, and there were things that there was no way she could have known, because I'd not actually, on my windowsill over there, I've got a little glass vase that was my mum's, that used to be next to my mum's bed. And every time my mum came to see me, she always used to bring flowers. And so after my mum had passed away, literally like a couple of weeks after, I'd gone and bought myself some flowers, you know, completely broken down in the flower shop and sobbed because I got to go and buy them myself. And I came home and I just felt really drawn to get this little vase and put it on the windowsill. And every time I buy flowers, I do flowers for me on the table, which are next to me. And then I do a flower for my mum, which is usually a rose, because it was my mum's favourite. And that night she said to me, "I love the flower on the windowsill, Claire, thank you."
Oh, you heard like a voice?
Yeah, she said it through my friend. She said, because it was a weird thing, as we were having the conversation, Irena was talking, but she wasn't talking, if you know what I mean. It was my mum telling her what to say. And so I asked loads of questions. I was like, well, what about this then? So I was like, come on, I'm going to test you now. And she answered. And like I say, she just out of the blue, she said, "I love the flower on the windowsill, Claire, thank you." And I hadn't even told anybody. Obviously, my husband knew it was my mum's vase, but he didn't know why I was doing what I was doing. And so, you know, I'm a big believer that every single day, something will come to us that will expand us and that will help us start to feel into something in a different way. Because that's the thing, is it's a really all about the feeling. And that's one of the things that kind of for me has been the undertone of what you've talked about, is we've whilst the mental part of everything with us is huge, if you look at it from a bigger perspective, the gut is brain number 1, the heart is brain number 2, and the brain is brain number 3. And you know, there's so much stuff about mindset, and yes, I love mindset. I think it's got a huge part in everything. But what about all this bit kind of below here? You know, we've got a huge body. So use the body, feel into what's going on, because when you start feeling it, it really changes everything. And I think that that's absolutely key.
Yeah, feeling right into it. I know. It's powerful stuff. And I've been thinking more, you know, there's so much research, and I've had people on my podcast speaking about the gut brain connection. And I guess it's a thing with the soul as well, though. It's knowing, you know, because you've got this body and you're tuning in. And I think we spoke about this when I interviewed you about that, knowing what's from the soul.
Yes.
And what's from the head, right?
Yeah. And it isn't that, it's how I've come to that conclusion is experience, you know, and actually it's that, and I'm sure I did say it when we talked, it's about that quote from Steve Jobs about connecting the dots, looking backwards, not looking forwards. Because I know, like the thing that led to my bankruptcy, I clearly remember the day that I made that decision. I was sitting on a bench in El Campello in Spain, on the front, talking to a person, and I agreed to something. And in my gut was going, no, Claire, no, it was screaming at me. I felt sick as I said yes, and not in a good way. And ultimately, that decision led to me being made bankrupt by somebody else. And I knew in that moment that it was the wrong thing to do, but I was following my head logic. I wasn't following my gut, and I definitely wasn't following my heart. And it was only having lived it and experienced it that then when I started on the bigger road of healing that I went on, that I was able to look back to it and pinpoint exactly and go, that was where it started. And that was you know, that was one of the dots in that particular row that led to this outcome. But as he said, you know, you can't connect dots looking forwards. You've got to keep making these decisions. You've got to keep experiencing these things for you to then go, hang on a second. That was, and so, you know, for me, it's about living, and it's one of the key things that I've learned to do is the art of contemplation. Because again, going back to what you said earlier about, you know, these things, I'm not a person that responds to a message as soon as it comes, because there's so many different messages. I very rarely ever have volume switched on my phone. It drives my husband insane because he's like, I can never get you when I want you, Claire. But, you know, I'm in a few different WhatsApp groups for different things that I do, and they just ping constantly. And, you know, it takes your brain 40 minutes to re-engage every time it's distracted. So actually, like you say, removing the distractions and stopping yourself from constantly, you know, being, oh my God, I've got it. And sometimes, you know, people will send me a message and 2 hours later I haven't responded. And then I get a, did you get my message?
Oh, impatience. And
then I actually purposely ignore it because I'm like, yeah, I did, but I am not at the beck and call of my phone. I'm in control of my life, not my phone. So what you said is absolutely key.
Yeah, it's boundaries, isn't it? And it's knowing when you're in that kind of drive mode, achieve, do, answer, and that pressure, and it's kind of coming back to, you know, right, okay, just stay in the moment and not get stuck on that train too much, find the balance.
Yeah, because how often have we been told have, do, be, have, do, be, and actually it's not have, do, be, it's be, do, have.
Yeah.
Because when you can become who you truly are here to be, you can then do the things that you are truly here to do. And then you can have the things that you are truly here to have. And, you know, one of my biggest, there's been, you know, really big lessons for me to learn. Reaction has been a massive thing for me to learn. I'm not completely there yet. I'm still on that process wheel. But, you know, I was really good at reacting. But when I look at my charts, reaction is huge for me. Reaction is actually one of my biggest shadows to overcome in this life. And also complexity. You know, if it could be done really simply, Claire would find the most complex way of doing it. And, you know, and again, I look back now and I can see those patterns. But, you know, I truly know that the universe had me go on this journey so that I can sit here from experience and say, I get it. I get it. You know, I was talking to a client earlier today who's come to me, and it was interesting. She actually came to me from doing a money course that I developed years ago. And she did this money course and she sent me an email and said, oh, you've got another course that's mentioned in here. Can you tell me where I can find the information for it? And I said, well, actually, it's not available anymore. Tell me, you know, how can I help you? And she said, well, I've got all these things going on in my life and it's all about money. And I just smiled and I was like, well, it's clearly not all about money, but, you know, I've been there, so I know why we blame money. Anyway, we've done a couple of sessions together now, and basically the conclusion that I knew we were going to come to is she's 54 years of age and she doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know what she's living her life for. She doesn't know who she's living her life for. She blamed it all on money because I said that was the easiest thing to point the finger at. But, you know, as you've said, we have to have these experiences, and being human is one of the hardest things in the world, isn't it?
I always just like to think, you know, when you go through times, it's like, right, what's the lesson here? And of course, you know, you perhaps have a period depending on your triggers and what you've been through. I used to worry that I was too positive for people, because I do love to learn from mistakes and lessons, but I think it helps, you know. I mean, the mental health thing I went through. So say it was a couple of, let's just say I started to go quite high. I was doing the energy course. It was January 2020, started to go quite high, but then I would become delusional. Then I felt like there was an evil spirit in me. Then I was hospitalized. And of course there was really traumatic times. But when I came out, the psychotherapist was just like, your recovery is going so well. I think it is because, one, you're talking openly.
Yeah.
And two, your sort of attitude to, right, how can I learn from this? What can I do? What do I need to do? Now, don't get me wrong, there was part of me that really wanted to rush. The determined part of me, which could perhaps be part shadow side, was, oh, you've got to rush this recovery and get off the pills straight away. And she was like, no, 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 you can't come off the pills straight away. You've been very, very unwell. You do need a bit of stability.
Yeah.
So I did have to have patience, but at the same time, I would do things that I would know would raise my energy and lower my anxiety, such as a lot of cold water therapy,
Yeah.
forcing myself out. Now, of course, I was thankful to have a support network. I was thankful to have a husband who would push me up hills when I felt so heavy from all the drugs and the exhaustion from the trauma to my brain.
Yeah.
But over the kind of 2 years of recovery, and that was during a lot of lockdown periods, you know, looking to see triggers. And one example was, I noticed in the car I could become quite triggered. I noticed that's when I wanted to like kill my husband sometimes in the car. And I'm going, I wonder why that is. Well, there's a lot of anxiety there, because, you know, if I see my mom in the car, I'm like, oh my goodness, you know, I'm so programmed to be anxious in the car. It's always, you know, I see these learned patterns. You know, I was in the car with him just a few weeks ago, and my brothers and I were like, oh my goodness. And it's not personal, it's just something about anxiety in the car. So I can be really, really triggered in the car. So not judging myself for that and feeling bad, but going, all right, that's a trigger for me. Or realizing a trigger is perhaps, you know, I love to trust people, and I love to believe that everyone is beautiful underneath it all, and we're all love. And I love to believe there's not evil, but there kind of is stuff, and people can let you down, and you can't trust everyone, and that's quite hard.
Get that.
You know, and it was just picking the lessons, spinning plates, saying yes. You know, there was such a collection of kind of key lessons that I had to unpick slowly, and still am unpicking some stuff. You know, I'm meeting with the spiritual care team next week, so I didn't even realize the NHS have a spiritual care team.
I didn't know that they had one until you said it just then.
Care team. So I'm meeting, I mean, as I say, I'm going in with an open mind to see what they say, but I want to pick through some of the stuff, because as a mental health researcher and a spiritual health researcher, I do feel that, you know, it can be sometimes hard to connect the two. Sometimes it feels like, oh, right, well, you're either a woo-woo person who believes in, you know, angels and God or universe, whatever you call it, source, love, or you're a person who's scientific. But of course, there's lots of people, and I've met lots of people that work in the wellness industry with very strong faith, or, you know, just very, very strong connections to the spiritual world. And I think for me, it's something that I'm still figuring out, you know.
And that's the beauty of Utopia, isn't it? It's the beauty of the fact that it's an evolving thing, and that, you know what, if you weren't still figuring it out, well, then actually life would be a bit boring, wouldn't it? You know, because that for me is a huge part of what it is. I mean, I got triggered by a situation a couple of weeks ago within my family with my dad. And I say triggered because it did trigger me. But but understanding the stuff that I understand, I know why it triggered me, because actually when I take information in that's a shock, I take it straight to the heart.
Right.
And because I'm a completely heart-centered person, it hit my heart. And so the Clare many years ago would have totally gone off on one. She would have reacted, she would have shouted, she would have, you know, really like made a massive deal of it. The Clare 2 weeks ago said, I am going to react if I don't stop. So I love you. I need to end this conversation now because I need to go away and process what you've just told me. It has triggered me into a reaction. I don't want to overreact. So I need to end the conversation now, and I need to go and deal with this. And I need to do that without you for the moment. And, you know, and for the person on the other end of the phone, it was a bit like, oh, and it, you know, it was my dad. But I just said, look, leave it with me. And the next day I said, right, I know how I feel now. I know what it triggered in me. I've started the healing process. I'm not ready to talk to you yet. I will be ready, and I'll get in touch with you when I am, you know, and we've had a conversation about it. We've dealt with it. But that's the thing. It's, you know, in really starting to understand my personality and starting to understand different facets of what Clare is all about, who I'm here to be, what I'm here to be, why I'm here, I'm then able to go, okay, so now I know why I responded in that way, or actually more importantly, why I reacted in that way. But the important thing is, like I say, 2 years ago, I would have totally, like, I would have annihilated him with words, because he was somebody close to me, you know, he is somebody close to me, and we hurt the people that we love the most, don't we? You know, that is human nature, what we do when we're not aware. And so, you know, I broke that pattern, but I just said, look, I've got to go deal with this. Please bear with. And he did, you know, and that's the good thing. I just said, look, this is not about you, it's about me. And, you know, and as you said earlier, we so often we make it about ourselves, when actually, you know, what happened with your dad wasn't about you, it was about your dad. But again, human nature means that what we try to do is we make it all about us. And you know, a lot of the time it's not about us. And so, you know, when you are able again to analyze at that deeper level, it's, you know, it's been a massive exploration for me, because this is stuff that 3 years ago I never even had heard of, I never knew about. And it's been absolutely life-changing, because it has put a completely different slant on everything. And it's like you say, you know, we have become, we've got all these labels, but for me, we've become very good at hiding sometimes a little bit behind the label for a good reason. But, you know, I always maintain that labels are for jars, they're not for people. And actually, if we allow ourselves to be, then, and just accept people for where they are right now, because they've had these experiences, and basically their nervous system has gone into overload and doesn't know how to deal with it. Okay, let's help you. You know, let's help you calm your nervous system down.
It's so true. I love that, the label. I'm going to use that. Labels are for jars, not for people.
And you know, that came to me, it actually came to me at the end of an interview that I did with another one of my business partners. And, you know, Tim didn't speak. I think it was for about 6 months when he was a kid, because of a situation that happened and triggered him into, we call it amygdala hijack, when you go into your fight, flight or freeze response. And he went into what he now knows now, but didn't know then, as I think he was like 7. He went into this massive amygdala hijack, and it affected him so badly that he didn't speak. And then when he did start to speak, he had a stutter. And it was basically because he was accused of doing something that he hadn't done, and his parents didn't believe him.
Oh no.
And so, you know, and like he had a lot of unpicking to do, But like Tim said, you know, he said, we go into these situations, you know, we did this interview and at the end of it, I just said, you know, we've got all these goddamn labels, haven't we? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. I really don't. But we've got PTSD, ADHD, all, you know, all these, autistic, all this. And I don't know, autism is a thing, but why do we have to define people by those things and those labels? Why can't we just define them as being human and say, you've had some shit go on in your life, haven't you? How can I help you?
Yeah, totally. I remember when I was getting checked out of hospital and the psychiatrist, who was just so busy, like hardly saw her. And at the end she was like, so there's bipolar support groups. And I was going, no one's ever said to me I'm bipolar. And you can't say I definitely am. Like, yeah. I've never had any experience. Like, I'm a human, I've had emotions, but up until 37 years old, I never had anything acute mentally. So to just put me with the bipolar label straight away, when you can't say that, like, yeah, you do not know. And then, but then I spoke to a wellness coach and they were like, well, everyone's a bit bipolar. And then I said, you know, a couple of years later to the psychiatrist, and I chat to her about every 6 months. And I said, you know, do you think I am bipolar? I said, you know, I don't know. She said, well, I can't say. She said, you could have a mild case. You might be a big feeler. Some people with mild cases, you know, they can manage without medication, with lifestyle. But, you know, it was that kind of, you know, because you feel when it comes to like medication and you hear all these things, oh, well, is that my label? And you start to overthink these labels. And it was actually, it's a strange one, because I'm like, if I was really struggling mentally, and that's, you know, you go in, you see a psychiatrist, a lot of the time they say, I don't know. Like when I first started to go high and manic, I was like, what's wrong with me? I don't know. You could just be stressed. I don't know. There's still a lot we can't explain, you know, yeah. We can't explain. So it's such a tricky one.
Yeah, it is. And it's, now is the time for us to discover this though, because now, putting my spiritual hat on, we have moved into the era of heart and soul. We're in the era of Aquarius, and we are in an era now where it is about us showing up as we truly are, and warts and all, and whether that's with great bits or really bad bits, all of it is relevant in its own way. And it's about us really owning that and actually saying, you know, why do we need to put a label on it? Because the fact of the matter is, it's like, I suppose one of the most famous cases of bipolar is Britney Spears. But actually, if you look at her life, she's not bipolar. She's had a lot of trauma. She was never allowed to be a kid. You know, she's been completely betrayed by her own father. You know, and I mean, obviously you only know to be true what, you know, you really, you know, what you've heard from her, and, you know, and is that completely true? Hopefully. But, you know, it's always, for me, it's always about looking backwards. It's always about saying, okay, so what's happened to you? And again, it could be, I always remember a lady that was a client of mine, and she's now a really good friend, and she'd got a lot of money stuff going on. And she was made bankrupt. And when she'd been made bankrupt, when she was still in the process of dealing with the initial part of the bankruptcy, she was almost like at the verge of being made bankrupt again, which wasn't even possible because she was still not an undischarged bankrupt. But we did some work, and we did some timeline therapy with her, which at the time was something that I was using NLP at the time. I do think NLP is a great tool. It's not anything I use anymore. But we did some timeline therapy, and basically I said, right, take me back to your earliest memory. And she said, I'm standing in the entrance of the hospital with my dad, and I'm going to see my new little sister. She said, and we've walked into the hospital, she said, and the nurse is standing there. She said, and I've got this really beautiful coat on. And the nurse says, oh, aren't you a beautiful little thing? And isn't your coat gorgeous? And now you've got a new little sister. And her dad said, yes, isn't she? Aren't they? And they're going to cost me a fortune. Bingo. subconscious memory registered. She'd never remembered that her entire life. She was 47 when we did this work. Wow. And she just stood there and went, oh my God. Oh my God. And that seed that had been planted that she'd had no recollection of up until that point, then became the pivotal point where everything started to change for her. And I think that, you know, again, for me, it's about bringing all of these things together because they all have their place. And that's the thing. And it's about knowing and understanding that whether it's practical, whether it's classed as not practical, quite frankly, whatever works.
Yeah. And the thing is, some things will trigger different people because that obviously stuck with her and then created, was it limiting beliefs around money?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
But then someone else could hear that and it perhaps wouldn't trigger much.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, 'cause if you were to analyze everything someone has ever said to you, right? This is what I find interesting. Like, what were the key triggers?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The same trauma could happen to two people and they turn out different.
Yes, totally. And the BBC did a study that it was a not panorama, it wasn't panorama. It was I can't think what the program's called. But basically they did a study on a group of children that started in 2020 and then went on until 2017. And basically they studied all these children, their behaviors, their thoughts, how their lives had panned out, what their parents were like. And basically what they really discovered is that you are absolutely a product of all the influences and the learned behavior around you, but then you are also a product of what you remember and what those learned behaviors do actually trigger in you. Because as you say, you know, that comment could have meant absolutely nothing to somebody else, but meant everything to her. And again, it's one of the things what I see as being really beautiful. And again, for me is utopia epitomized. We're all different. There's no cookie cutter of any of us, is there? We're all very different. And that's the beauty of human beings. We've all got our own individual DNA for a very good reason. You know, even if you're a twin, you don't have an identical DNA, do you? So when we accept people for exactly who they are and work with that, we can come from a very different place and we can come from a much bigger place of acceptance. And I think that is the future of where we go.
So would you say the key things we remember, whether it be something someone said about money or about weight or about, you know, anything, does that sort of based on what our key triggers are then? So the key things we remember are the things that matter to us for some reason, or?
Yeah, because again, it's if you look at it from an emotional perspective, generally speaking, all these things provoke an emotion, don't they? Mm-hmm. And when we're growing up, what are most kids told when they have an emotional reaction? Stop crying. Oh, for goodness sake, pull yourself together. Yeah. So nobody actually says, like when my little girl gets upset, I go, hey, darling, what's up? How can I support you right now? Or sometimes it might just be, I can clearly see she needs a cuddle. So we just sit there and we have a cuddle until she feels safe again. Because again, why do we react? Because our nervous system isn't feeling safe. And because again, nobody's told us how to process that. We don't teach kids about their emotions. Look at the world. That's how we know we don't teach kids about their emotions. And so there's a guy called Desipani. I don't know if you've ever come across the work of Desipani. Really interesting guy, Australian guy, studied to be a monk, and then came out of being a monk, and now he's a professional speaker, but he's a spiritual guy that shares his wisdom. And he says, we're constantly telling children to concentrate. He said, but who teaches children how to concentrate? We don't teach children how to concentrate, but we expect them to know how to do it. And so for me, when we start breaking these things down and looking at them for what they really are, then what we can do is say, well, okay, that makes complete sense. Because actually, to be able to, to be able to know how to do something, you really need somebody to teach you how to do it, don't you? Well, emotions are no different. And so when we get triggered by things that happen, then we don't necessarily see it as that. We internalize it. We generally make ourselves wrong, but actually we don't know why we're making ourselves wrong. And it's not until somebody says, hey, hang on a second, how did that make you feel? Because feeling is everything, isn't it?
Yeah, I clash with my mum sometimes in that she'll say to me about my son who's 7, don't mother him too much. So he hurt himself the other day and I was like, oh, come here. And my mum's like, don't gush over him, man up, man up. And I'm like, oh, she's like, you'll grow up to be a little brat if you mother him too much. And I'm going, yeah, but empathy is a learned skill, mum. He needs to know that if he's hurting, I'm hearing. But her school of thought is very much tough love.
Yeah.
I'm going to raise a little prince. And she's convinced, she's like, if you keep this up, you'll come to me and say, and I'm saying, but he's a lovely boy, he's caring. She thinks I'm going to raise an entitled brat.
But why does she think like that? Because that's what she's been programmed to think. That's her learnt behavior. Like when I was a kid, like you said, when I misbehaved, I got smacked. I've never smacked my daughter. She's 7 years old. I've never, ever smacked her. I never, ever will. Don't get me wrong. I've been close to it where I've really wanted to, because I'm like, you're going to, I can hear my mum, you're going to learn the hard way, you are. Yeah. And then I'm like, no, I am breaking that generational pattern. Why was my mum like that? Because that's how her dad was. Why was her dad like that? Because he spent 4 bloody years in Burma. That's why, the guy experienced horrific things that we could never even begin to imagine. And this is the thing is, I'm consciously not parenting the way that I was parented, because the way that I was parented was tough love. Oh, come on, Claire, pull yourself together, get on with it. Yet I'm a real empath. I'm massively emotional. So actually what you're doing is you're telling me to shut down who I am and become somebody else because that's your perspective on it. Well, I respect your perspective, but actually I'm going to do it my way. And like you say, if my little girl hurts herself, I give her a cuddle. And I don't think she's going to turn out like that. I actually know. I mean, again, I've done all Olive's charts. Olive is a massive empath. One of her biggest shining lights is empathy. So she needs to experience empathy from others for her to feel safe. So what do? I give her loads of empathy because that's working with her personality. And, the other day we went to school, her dad had been working away. We got to the classroom door and she just burst into tears and she didn't want to go in. And I'm hugging her and I'm just, I'm really calm with my energy and I was just holding her tight and I was, imagining that I was oozing my calm into her and that I was bringing that to her. And basically, the teaching assistant comes out and she goes, shall I take her in now? And I went, no. And she said, shall I just leave you to it? And I said, yes, she'll be in a second. I'm her mom. I will calm her down. I am not sending her in there to you in a very, very emotional, triggered state. I need to calm her down. Allow me to do that. Once I've done that, she'll come into school. If it means she misses 5 minutes, hey ho, it's not the end of the world and it isn't going to be the end of the world for her education. So please, I'm her mom. I know her far better than you do. And, and I said that to them afterwards. I said, look, in the nicest possible way, whilst I fully appreciate you've got rules and regulations and a school to run, when my daughter is upset, I will deal with it. So trust me. And 2 minutes later, she was calm enough. She walked into school. She was absolutely fine. But if I pushed her in, what would have happened? Program created. My mom pushes me away when I'm trying to deal with my emotions. Boom. What could that cause in the future? Maybe nothing. But I'm aware that, and it's not mollycoddling, it's being aware of her emotional state. And I think that is the future. allowing us to be fully aware of other people's emotional states, and that will then change everything.
Yeah, it can be hard when you've got someone perhaps headstrong in your family or society or a colleague, and it's like black and white. This is, you know, so this is a way to parent, this is the way to do this, this is the way to do politics, and very, very set and fixed minds. It can take courage to stand up to these people.
It does take courage to stand up to them, Jojo. It absolutely does.
And show that you're going to parent the way that you see best for your kids.
Yeah.
You're going to live your life in a way that you see to be best. You know, it's a daily, sometimes it can feel like a daily battle to stand your ground with things that, you know, and I feel like sometimes if you're having a difficult conversation, your chakras, like your throat, can start to, you know, when you really want to be honest, and I could feel my throat clamming up because I knew what I was saying was perhaps going to trigger something in someone, but it was something they needed to hear because they weren't being honest with me. And when I don't do bull, right? I am straight up, always have been. Dad called me WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. That's who I am. And I'm thankful for that. Not everyone will like it, but I'm thankful for that because it allows me to, you know, heal. But there's still times that if you feel someone else is holding back, you're like, oh, just tell me.
Yeah. Anyway, on that note, I'm conscious of the time. I need to let you go. I need to go. Jojo, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Let's do this again really soon. And I look forward to getting this up online and also getting as up online too and sharing what we know with the world.
Lovely to chat as always.
You too. Thank you. Bye, darling. Bye-bye.
Bye.